Religions flowed along the Silk Roads. They mixed and formed into a melting pot of the divine. Western ideas about the gods entered the East, and Eastern ideas of the divine went to the West. Faiths jostled alongside each other, and countries used them as political tools. Rulers would help establish temples and elevate religious officials, while simultaneously making regional changes to their chosen religion that were beneficial to themselves. Religion also adapted more naturally, such as Buddhism, which turned from something spiritual to something more material. Shrines and monasteries, some elaborately decorated, and all examples of Buddhism's new and more tangible nature, sprouted from China to Persia, helping Buddhism spread as enterprising Sogdian merchants and Indian and Kushan rulers advanced it. However, in Persia, it experienced difficulties. Remember those Sasanians from the last episode? They didn't like it. Quick recap, they were new rulers of Persia, so they needed to legitimize themselves as proper Persians. As part of their legitimization process, they turned to the ancient Persian religion of Zoroastrianism. Thus, Zoroastrianism became the religion of the dominant political elite. That meant that there were periods when being Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, or Jewish meant that life was difficult, as religious minorities could be persecuted, sometimes severely. However, there were also long periods of cooperation, which depended on the fortunes, issues, and even the personal character of the Sasanian ruler, and those of his high priest. One group in particular they focused on were the Christians. You see, while nowadays we associate Christianity with the West, in its early days it was Asian. It was shaped by its roots in the Near East, and it spread far better to the east than throughout the Mediterranean. At first, the Romans treated the Christians with bemusement, but when ideological differences began to set in and Christianity seriously started to move in, things got a bit difficult for the Christians. Sporadic and violent persecutions took place, such as those in the reigns of Nero and Diocletian. However, in the east it pushed deep into Turkey, the Caucasus, Persia, and even as far as Afghanistan. Anyway, let's focus on the early AD 300s. In 301, the Armenian king Tiridates III was the first ruler of a nation to convert to Christianity. In 312, a Roman general was reportedly shown a cross-shaped light in the sky before an important battle, and then he won the battle. He was Constantine the Great, and with the battle won, he became emperor. He then legalized Christianity in the Edict of Milan. Christian persecutions halted, and Christian despised practices such as gladiator fights ended. Jerusalem, Christianity's birthplace, was refurbished, and his new capital of Constantinople had no pagan sites. Christian authors lauded his advancement of Christianity and neglect of standard Roman theology. However, his embrace of Christianity may not have been as sincere as suggested. There were a large number of Christians in the army, so aligning himself with them earned their respect, making it a shrewd political move. Also, archaeological evidence suggests he was a supporter of the Sol Invictus cult. Alongside all this, leading figures in Rome simply didn't follow his lead. Nevertheless, his actions had consequences. Christians became more accepted in the West, but this was bad news for Christians in the East. Not too hard to figure out why. Having your rival suddenly appeal to a lot of your populace would be disturbing, especially if your relations with this group of the populace were already a little tense. Then, in a letter to Shapur II, ruler of Persia, Constantine declared himself the sponsor of Persia's Christians. This did not help things. Shapur got nervous. The conversion of the king of Georgia was the final straw. He invaded the Caucasus Mountains and replaced a local ruler with one of his own choosing. Constantine prepared a massive and heavily Christian-linked counterattack. Then Constantine died, and Shapur set out on a bloodbath. Christians were hunted down, bishops and priests martyred. Constantine's promotion of Christianity in the Roman West now resulted in a violent repression of Christianity in the Persian East. Sort of. Something else I should mention, another theory which isn't quite so dramatic, put forward by Richard E. Payne in the first chapter of his book, A State of Mixture. Now, while one reviewer is quite critical of a lot of the first chapter of this book, he points out a part which he thinks is convincing. The idea that Christian leaders were killed because they defied Shaper II by refusing to help him raise taxes among the Christians. So, the Great Persecution, as this is called, could have been part fear of foreign influence, part really harsh punishment for disobedience. Whatever the reasons, things were not looking good for the Christians in Persia. However, since the chapter in the book ends here, I'm afraid I must leave off from what happened next.